Okay, I can do this. There we go. All right, chapter 2, social self. Maybe. There's a subtle connection between what is happening in the world around us and what is going on in our heads. It's not exactly the same thing. Maybe we're not seeing everything, or maybe we're thinking about something that isn't happening in our real world. Social surroundings tend to affect self awareness. Depending on who we are and where we are, each individual is aware of the differences between themselves and everyone else. And you'll have to admit that you're not the same as everybody else. Uh, your brothers and sisters are maybe you're all watching the same television show, but they're acting differently, or they're scrolling on their phones while you're uh, very interested in the show, or vice versa. Self interest colors social judgment. People tend not to be objective or dispassionate when they are dealing with a situation they are involved in. Self concern motivates social behavior. People do things for their own selves and often function to please or impress society at large. Self awareness is a state of focused attention on the self. Self awareness is associated with with activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, and that's it right there. Self awareness develops in humans at about the 18-month mark. Some animals, but not many, show self awareness. Wolves and other pack animals don't seem to have self awareness at all. So if you're talking about your dog, you're talking about coyotes, the mass of dogs that wander around the reservation. Those individuals don't understand that they aren't part of. That's one of the reasons why dogs pack. Dogs aren't wild, but when you get them in a pack, they act like wild animals. Why do they do that? Because they don't have self-awareness. They don't recognize that they are individual. And the interesting thing about dogs, if you have dogs in your house or around your house, you become part of their pack. And so that's the way they look at you. And that may be one reason why they'll listen to one person and not listen to another. This happens to me and my wife. My wife likes to spoil the dogs, and I tell them what to do. And because of that, I'm probably a little bit more alpha than she is. And they will just ignore her if they don't care about what's going on. They just ignore her. Besides personal attributes, the self concept contains memories, the basis for knowledge about oneself. Autobiographical memory, memory of information relating to oneself, demonstrates that the self plays a powerful role in the recall of events. The self is an especially powerful memory system because events and attributes stored in the self contain many associations. Events in autobiographical memory are stored at two levels: the general events and broad lifetime periods. General events include events that have happened in your life, whereas lifetime periods refer to important times in your life, such as childhood and adolescence. So you may be thinking of yourself, well, this is how I acted when I was in junior high school. I acted completely different in high school because I was so cool. And now that I'm no longer in high school, this is the way I am, and this is the way I act. This is totally different lifetime periods. The self is concerned with maintaining positive self feelings, thoughts, and evaluations. One way to do this is by influencing memory. The self functions as a kind of unconscious monitor that enables people to avoid disquieting and distressing information. One of the things that the human brain tries to do, it tries to stay away from negative thoughts. And this is one of the reasons why if you become depressed about this or that or something else, your brain will try to not make you depressed anymore because it's a situation that it has a very difficult time handling. Therefore, and this is one of the reasons why depression usually doesn't last very long for most people. Depression is very real, but why isn't it perpetual? With most people, with all the vast majority of people, if they get depressed, something in their brain tells them to stop it. They think of something pleasant, something else starts happening in the brain. The self demands that we preserve what we have, especially that which makes us feel good about ourselves. I just threw the cat off my lap. That's what that squall was. Damn cat. Anyway, most people take 2 seconds to answer questions about their traits. This is because we have a summary knowledge of our self traits, especially the most obvious ones. This makes it harder to access memories that conflict with our positive self concept, because memories that match a person's self concept are recalled easier. In research where the participants keep diaries of their own and a significant other's life events, they were able to recall recent and older events more quickly than events in the middle of the research time period. Pleasant events were recalled better than unpleasant events, and extreme events better than neutral episodes. Pleasant episodes that fit the individual's self-concept were the most easily recalled because they fit in with the way we think of ourselves. The self monitors experiences processing information in ways that makes the individual look good to themselves. Interactions and events are interpreted, organized, and remembered, recalling primarily pleasant, self-relevant events that fit the self-concept. Memories that an individual recalls tends to fit the mood that they are in. Mood congruence recall is due to the greater likelihood that the memory is able to find negative memories to fit the mood. Thus, negative moods lead to negative memories, which can induce a self-defeating cycle of sadness and depression. And this is one of the reasons why people stay in depression. They can't get out. Why? Because they are in a negative mood, and that will be the memories that they keep bringing forth. And until they stop being depressed, they have a difficult time doing that, like that little baby. When a negative event occurs, an individual will often remember a positive event to make themselves feel better. This is known as an incongruence effect. Thus, autobiographical memories may be called up to perform certain functions: regulating your mood, enhancing self-continuity, directing behavior, enhancing self-esteem. And that's what I was talking about before. This is one of the reasons why it's difficult to stay depressed for an extended length of time. And it's because your brain doesn't want this to happen. Your brain wants to feel good. It's a lot easier and it's a lot more pleasant to feel good. And this is why most people have a difficult time staying unhappy for an extended length of time. Apple cider. But some people in negative moods maintain the negative mood while others make themselves feel better. If a person adopts a focused, reflective attitude, admits that they failed, and explore how they can regulate the mood, they feel proactive and better. However, if they ruminate on their negative mood, they will focus on it neurotically and passively on the negative events and feelings causing depression. And this is from the movie Better Off Dead. He's thinking of committing suicide. And the guy says, "Buck up, little camper," and he knocks him off the bridge. And he falls into a garbage truck. Old movie from the 80s. One of my favorites. Our brains not only maintain an individual self, but a collective self as well. The collective self is that part of our self-concept that comes from our membership in groups and reflects the evaluation of the self by important and specific groups to which we belong. And I can't remember why I put the map of the United States in here. I really can't. Oh. This is a map about collectivism. I don't know. This is where I live, Iowa. Whether the individual self or collective self becomes dominant is dictated by a person's culture. In some cultures, the individual self is dominant. Collectivist cultures show a pattern of close links between individuals who define themselves as interdependent members of groups and families. And of course, the most individualistic countries in the world are English-speaking countries: England, United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And most collectivist states are in the South. And California, that's a little weird. Anyway, you can see how non-collectivist Iowa is. And this is where I'm from, Indiana. It's about half of the people are more collectivistic than in other places. Indiana used to be a farming state and a factory state. It had lots of factories. Factories have closed and the farms are gone. It's just mostly people. The fields have become housing developments. Iowa, however, is still a farming state. Lots of agriculture here. And the part that I live in is especially heavy in agriculture. I'm surrounded by fields, huge fields, hundreds of acres. Flatland. I'm a flatland. I like it here. Through experiments involving threats to the collective and individual selves, Gertner et al. In 1999 discovered that threats to the individual self met with stronger emotion than threats to the collective self. This suggests that the individual self is primary, at least to people in the United States. Individualism and collectivism, me, 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 me. And collectivism is we, 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 we. A famous American proverb is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This means that the more you make yourself known, stand out, or unique, complain, the more attention you will get. Be unique, that's the answer. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Stay squeaky, my friends. This is an old Dos Equis commercial. A famous Japanese proverb, the nail that stands out gets pounded down. This means that if you're unique or stand out in any way, the culture will force you to conform. Be like everyone else. And of course, Japan is a very collectivistic culture. And if you stand out in any way, by golly, culture will tell you to stop. We saw that last time, didn't we see, what was it, Andrew Martinez? The naked guy. And that's what they called him, the naked guy. The naked guy stood out, and by golly, eventually they hammered him down. Technology and social media have opened up a whole new dimension of the self. People seem to maintain an alternative self that exists in cyberspace. Studies show that the self individuals disclose on social media is not the same as they disclose in face-to-face situations. So I may be totally different. If you saw me, if I actually came back to the campus, and I was teaching this class on the campus, I might be totally different. Probably not. I'm really old. I'm not sure I could maintain two different identities. It's snowing here. It's been snowing all day. We got about 2 inches of snow. Not only is the internet self different than the face-to-face self, but research has shown that women and men have different patterns of internet selves. Women are more likely to use carefully chosen pictures to present themselves, while men are more likely to use verbal descriptions. Managing sensitive identities, such as members of the LGBTQ community, is often a question of what and how much to disclose. Facebook is often the first foray into coming out for gay men. Gay men also use social media to explore the ambiguity that they might find in defining the complexity of their sexual orientation. Racial and ethnic minorities also deal with social media differently. Black clients tend to include more psychological and self-descriptive statements than white or Asian clients. Black clients also used more words to describe their family than white and Asian clients, while white clients posted more pictures than Black or Asian clients. A schema is an organized set of related cognitions about a person, event, or experience. A self-schema is an arrangement of information, thoughts, and feelings about ourselves, including gender, age, race, occupation, social roles, physical attractiveness, intelligence, talents, etc. Self-schemas may be different for different areas of life activities. Self-schemas serve a very important function. They organize our self-related experiences so that we can respond quickly and effectively in social situations. They help us interpret situations, guide our behavior, and help us understand new events. Self-schemas lend order to experiences. They guide what is encoded into memory and how it is stored. Memories that meet self-schemas are easier to recall, and they influence thought and behavior in the future. One aspect of human life that has been ignored by many past and present cultures to the point of hiding it in history is sexuality. But people do have sexual self-schemas. A sexual self-schema refers to how we think about sexual aspects of the self. Sexual self-schemas are derived from past sexual knowledge and experience, and they guide future sexual activity. Okay, talking about sexual self-schemas, this has been just fascinating to me, um, because if you look at or if you're in other cultures, you find out, geez, everybody's got a different sexual schema, a cultural schema. Japan, for example, my goodness, very much different. There is televised nudity in Japan, yet they are very, how can I say this? If you look at the comic books that young girls read, they're fairly graphic, and they show a lot of sexuality. Um, but strangely enough, looking at the statistics, 30% of people in Japan, this is both males and females, 30% of the individuals over the age of 30 are still virgins. They've never had sex. And that seems a little odd when the culture is so enmeshed with sexuality. It's the same way in Germany. In Germany, there is public nudity. It's not that uncommon uh, to see pictures of women's naked breasts. Um, my poor wife, we were stationed in Germany, and she went there before the rest of the family came over. And she's driving down the road, and she's headed to Ramstein, and there was a German army truck that had stopped in front of her. And evidently they had been riding for a while, and they got out to pee. They got out to urinate, and they're all just standing on the side of the road, urinating into the ditch. And my wife drives by and hears all these German soldiers standing there urinating. It was really kind of odd. They were waving at her. Really weird. Something you don't see in the United States, but she saw it in Germany, so that's the way it works. And like I said, there's they have nudity in their advertisements. Of course, that's not something that you would see in the United States. Positive versus negative research by Siranowski and Anderson in 1998 found that women with positive sexual self-schemas were more likely to have had previous sexual relationships, be in a current relationship, and display more passionate attachment to their partners. Women with negative sexual self-schemas displayed avoidance of intimacy and passion and were more anxious about sexual activity. While women's sexual self-schemas fit into categories, men's sexual self-schemas flow along a continuum from schematic to aschematic. Schematic men display strong emotions of passion and love and see themselves as strong and aggressive, with liberal sexual attitudes that result in casual sex but strong attachments. Aschematic men lead narrow sexual lives and have few, if any, sexual partners. Researchers have found that individual sexual self-schema are quite complex and can be affected by prior sexual history, current circumstance, and cultural imperatives that dictate sexual behavior. Researchers discovered that women in committed relationships focused on virginity less and sexual activity more, while women in less committed relationships reversed the focus. Older women focus less on sexual activity and more on attractiveness. Research with the sexual self-schema of gay men showed a conflict between, I'm lost here, just a second, between desire to avoid vulnerability coupled with a desire for an emotional connection with another person. Research shows that gay men may use casual sex as a way to experience the intimacy of a relationship without having to disclose intimate details about the self. Remember, homosexuality hasn't been an acceptable behavior for very long in the United States. It has been taboo. As a matter of fact, in some states, it has been against the law. So men hiding their sexuality, all of this has to do with society telling them who they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be. And I'm getting bald. I'll tell you what, I'm losing my hair. Research by Elder et al. In 2015 found that the sexual self-schema of gay men evolved into the gay orientation. Initially, sexual exploration involved frequent casual sex that eventually transformed into a relationship as they begin to fully identify as gay. Eventually, they decide to become involved in a committed or open relationship. An individual's self-esteem is their overall self-evaluation and sense of self-worth. Self-esteem influences how we approach and respond to life challenges. Self-esteem is the evaluation of one's self-concept. Most people regard themselves more positively than they do their peers, the better than average effect. People with low self-esteem seem to be more adversely affected by negative life events than people with high self-esteem. Emotional intelligence is a person's ability to perceive, use, understand, and manage emotions, and guides one's sense of self. Individuals who are emotionally intelligent tend to be more successful in personal and work relationships. The ability to monitor and regulate emotions allows them to think and behave appropriately. Individuals with high self-esteem take greater account of their emotions than people with lower self-esteem. Emotions are useful in a variety of areas, including understanding other people, creative thinking, and good health. When interacting with others, human beings have two primary self-related motives: to enhance self-esteem and to maintain self-consistency. Self-enhancement and self-verification motives conflict in low self-esteem persons. It appears that self-enhancement motive operates in the response to a person's feelings, while self-verification operates in response to a person's thoughts. The two motives operate on different time courses. The affective route is quicker, but the cognitive route is more persistent. The two motives serve as checks and balances on each other. Only in cases of maladjustment does one motive strongly dominate the other. Studies suggest that the self-enhancement motive is weaker in collectivist societies than in individualist societies. So this conflict may be an artifact of individualist culture. Resilient studies of survivors of the terror attacks on 11 September 2011 or 2001 show that people who used self-enhancement strategies suffered less from the trauma. Self-enhancers showed fewer post-traumatic and depressive symptoms than those who weren't self-enhancers. Self-enhancers tend to project very positive feelings and believe that they are in total control of themselves. There is a dark side to self-esteem. People with high self-esteem may react with greater aggression than others when someone challenges their favorable self-assessments. The stability of high self-esteem seems to determine whether threats to self-esteem leads to aggression. Unstable self-esteem may come from conflicts between explicit and implicit self-esteem. High explicit self-esteem and low implicit self-esteem are together associated with narcissism. In Greek mythology, Narcissus fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water and was so fond of his own image that he couldn't leave and eventually died because he was so pretty. Today, narcissism refers to a combination of excessive self-love and a lack of empathy toward others. The top red line shows average scores for college students on the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, a common measure of narcissism from the years 1980 to 2008. The bottom blue line shows a percentage of first-person pronouns, I, me, mine, in the lyrics of one of 10 most popular songs of the year from 1980 to 2007. As you can see, there has been a steady increase on both measures over time, suggesting that narcissism may be increasing. Isn't that ugly? Implicit self-esteem refers to a very efficient system of self-evaluation that is below our conscious awareness. Implicit self-esteem comes from parents who nurture their children but do not overprotect them, and it is unconscious and not controlled by the individual. Implicit self-esteem is automatic and less likely to be affected by day-to-day events. Explicit self-esteem arises primarily from interactions with people in our everyday life. The relationship between implicit and explicit self-esteem is unclear. The relationship is mediated by a number of factors such as gender, culture, and individualism. High implicit self-esteem is related to very positive health and social attributes, while explicit self-esteem seems to be more fragile or defensive, which accounts for the emotional reactions that threats to individuals with high explicit self-esteem evoke. Higgins in 1989 proposed that people think of themselves from two different standpoints, their own perspective and that of a significant other, such as a parent or a close friend. He also suggested that people have three selves that guide their behavior: the actual self, the person's current self-concept; the ideal self, the mental representation of what a person would like to be or what a significant other would like the person to be; and the ought self, the mental representation of what the person believes he or she should be. Higgins in 1989 assumed that people are motivated to reach a state in which the actual self matches the ideal and the ought selves. The latter two selves thus serve as guides to behavior. In Higgins' self-discrepancy theory, when there is a discrepancy between the actual self and the self-guides, we are motivated to try to close the gap. We try to adjust our behavior to bring it into line with our self-guides. The process we use to make such adjustments is known as the self-regulation, our attempt to match our behavior or our self-guides to the expectations of others, and it is a critical control mechanism. A form of self-regulation is self-control. Self-control operates within self-regulation processes and occurs when we consciously try to override a behavior that is dominant for us. Self-control is a specific form of self-regulation used when we consciously try to override a dominant behavior. Not only do individuals differ on the need to self-regulate, so do people who live in different cultures. Heine and Lehman, and Heine, of course, is the author of the textbook that we use in cultural psychology, observed that whereas residents of the United States and Canada showed a strong bias towards adapting to others' expectations, Japanese citizens are less likely to try to self-regulate. They found that Japanese participants were much more self-critical than were North Americans and had greater discrepancies between their actual self and the ideal or ought selves. But these differences were less distressing to the Japanese and did not motivate them to change. And this is, of course, a picture of Japanese men. When there is a good match between our actual self and our ideal self, we experience feelings of satisfaction and high self-esteem. When there is a good match between our actual self and our ought self, we experience feelings of security. Good matches may also allow people to focus their attention outside themselves on other people and activities. When the discrepancy gap can't be closed, we simply are not capable of behaving in accord with our expectations. In this case, we may have to adjust our expectations to match our behavior. And sometimes it seems to be in our best interest not to focus on the self at all. To do so may be too painful, or it may get in the way of what we're doing. Research has shown that when people are not particularly focused on themselves, self-discrepancies go unnoticed. When self-awareness is high, discrepancies become very noticeable. Having positive self-esteem does not mean that people have only positive self-evaluations. When normal people with positive self-esteem think about themselves, roughly 62% of their thoughts are positive and 38% are negative. The self has the capacity to engage in effortful behavior to deal with the external world. The part of the self that carries out this executive function probably does it in an automatic, a non-conscious fashion, dealing with the world in neutral gear. But when the self has to actively control and guide behavior, much effort is required. No matter what statistics might say to the contrary, most people see their community, state, and region as similar to that described by Garrison Keillor of Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. Most people maintain a self-serving bias or the tendency to perceive themselves favorably. Such ideas allows individuals to interpret negative events as someone else's fault and positive events that may have happened through chance as due completely to their own positive attributes. Failures are externally caused while successes are internally caused. In one study from Canada of young married couples, researchers discovered that males felt that they did more housework than their wives gave them credit for. However, at the same time, the wives took credit for more of the housework than they actually performed. Each group participated in self-serving bias, but unfortunately, this self-serving bias caused marital discord. Self-serving bias is evident in academia as well. When students do well on an exam, Not only was there hard work that allowed them to do well, but the test was a true measure of the material. When students do poorly, it is usually because of the instructor. However, instructors are just as bad. Successes are due to their ability to teach, and failure is due to a poor student, not the quality of the instruction. By making excuses for ourselves, it helps to protect us from depression. While depressed people may make more accurate appraisals of themselves, the negative thinking tends to mire them deeper in depression. Better to be deluded than sad. Research shows that maintaining a high self-esteem, even when there is evidence to the contrary, reduces an individual's anxiety, even even at the face of continuing threats. Most university sorority members perceive those in their sorority as far less likely to be conceited and snobby than those in other sororities. Two-thirds of Americans feel that their child's public school is good while seeing the nation's public schools as unable to teach. Most executives overpredict their firm's ability to produce. Such self-serving bias can lead an individual to gamble away their paycheck, having faith in their own good fortune. Such self-serving bias will permit an individual to open a doomed business without proper background capital. Such self-serving bias possibly took us into Vietnam, the Soviets into Afghanistan, and even U.S. forces into Iraq and Afghanistan. Research confirms that people want to have accurate information about themselves, even if that information is negative. It helps them know which situations to avoid and which to seek out. There is evidence that people want others to evaluate their negative attributes a little more positively than they themselves do. People with high self-esteem take credit for success, even when other people may have helped them. Interestingly, all people seem to have an egotistical bias. That is, they present themselves as responsible for success, whether they are or are not. Some people are high self-monitors, while others are low self-monitors. Some people will readily adjust their behavior to their circumstance and the individuals that they are around. Some social settings dictate that the individual adjusts their behavior to fit the social setting. One problem with people who are high self-monitors, they may espouse one idea in one circumstance and the opposite in another. High self-monitors are social chameleons, and this is what a chameleon actually looks like. Self-monitoring is a tendency to use cues from other people's self-presentation in controlling our own self-presentations. High self-monitors are skilled impression managers. High self-monitors are concerned with how things look to others. High self-monitors tend to choose romantic partners who are physically attractive. Low self-monitors are more concerned with meeting people with similar personality traits and interests. Sometimes people sabotage their chances for success by creating impediments that make success less likely. This self-handicapping serves to protect the individual from dealing with failure. The failure is due to their own handicap, not to their lack of ability. Just as people attribute their failures on external causes, they themselves may choose to place the impediment as a form of self-protection. Examples of self-handicapping: reducing preparation for important individual athletic events, giving one's opponent an advantage, report feeling depressed, perform poorly at the beginning of a task in order not to create unreachable expectations, not try as hard as they could during a tough ego-involving task. Alcohol and drug abuse may be an example of self-handicapping. Abusers may be motivated by a need to have an excuse for possible failure. They prefer that others blame substance abuse for their anticipated failure rather than lack of ability. Self-handicapping is thus another way people attempt to maintain control over the impression others have of them. People tend to process information and remember information related to themselves more readily than any others. This is known as self-reference effect. For most people, the most important thing to them is themselves. Research done where individuals were singled out by having them wear clothing that they weren't used to showed they felt as if everyone was watching them, the spotlight effect. And the reason I have this picture is because at some gala, this individual dressed as a orc or something. I don't know what she is, a goblin? Anyway, you can see the other people around her. They're not all dressed normally. Anyway, she dressed like that. And she came to the same gala dressed like that. Gilovich and colleagues believe that we have the same preoccupation that others notice and pay attention to our external actions and appearance. With respect to our hidden internal feelings, they call this illusion of transparency, the belief that observers can read our private thoughts and feelings because they somehow leaked out. And of course, most of us are more covered than that. And that is the end of the chapter. I was about to fall asleep. You guys almost knocked me out.